With everyone's permission, I will begin the meeting. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to this online event organized by the Institute for Policy Reforms on energy and power for all, sustainable, affordable, and reliable. My name is Ashraf Hayat. I work at the Institute. I'm the executive director. A deep thanks to everyone for joining, and especially the speakers. Honorable Special Assistant to the Prime Minister, Mr. Nadine Babar, Senator Ruksana Zuberi, Dr. Salim Ali, University of Delaware, and Mia Anjum Nisar Saab, President FPCI. You honor us with your time. We start with a short recitation from the Holy Quran. Mr. Irtika Zaidi is one of the participants, and I've requested him to recite a sitting.
Thank you, sir. Assalamu alaikum. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم لإلاف قريش إيلافهم رحلة الشتاء والصيف فليعبدوا رب هذا البيت الذي أطعمهم من جوع وآمنهم من خوف صدق الله العظيم.
Once again, welcome everyone. We will begin with introductory comments from Humayun Khan. He really needs no introduction. He has decades of public service experience. He's also CEO and chairperson of this institute, the Institute for Policy Reforms. And as most of us know, he was Pakistan's Congressman in 2002 to 2007. Before that, he was Chairman BOI and State Minister for Investment. In 4 general elections, Mr. Khan was elected to the country's National Assembly. He's the spirit behind it, which is an expression of his belief in making public policy work for all and in strengthening public institutions. Humayun Saab, I request him for his welcome comments and for introducing today's topic. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Ashraf Saab, and welcome and thank you everyone for joining this online meeting, Energy and Power for All. I especially thank these speakers for sparing time to share ideas and knowledge on a subject that affects us deeply. It should be no surprise about why IPR chose to hold this discussion. Availability of reliable energy and affordable power is critical for businesses to flourish and citizens to thrive. It is an urgent and vital area for the country to reform if Pakistan is to emerge out of its perennial economic challenges. Though power supply has improved in recent years, Pakistan has a long way to go. It still does not offer reliable and affordable power to its firms or its people. Successive governments have promised to reform this area, but not with much success. According to the World Bank, Pakistan's power supply is one of the most unreliable in the world. In the World Economic Forum's Competitiveness Report 2019, Pakistan ranks 111th of 141 countries in access to electricity and 99th in quality of supply. About 1/3 of our people have no access to power. That is, 1/3 of our citizens cannot fully participate in the nation's economic life. Our speakers know best that there are many areas that need reforms at all stages of the power supply chain. It begins with the challenge of competing demand for gas, followed by the need for efficiency in power generation. Transmission and distribution loss of both power and gas are high. Conservation is not yet a priority. With regard to energy sources, thermal is the main source of power generation, with increase in reliance on imported coal and RLNG. Domestic production of gas has not grown for several years. I understand that government is working on policies and incentives to enhance production. This should have happened several years ago. There are market reports that the glut in oil stock would likely clear in the coming weeks. And so prices are expected to increase, which will put added strain on Pakistan's external account. Despite some correction in generation costs through use of imported RLNG and coal, high energy input price has caused instability in the power supply chain. Liberal incentives for private producers have added to generation cost, and high revenue losses at the retail end have also contributed to making the sector unsustainable. Resultantly, government pays subsidy to keep in check further price increase, but when that gets delayed, it sets in motion a whole chain of unpaid bills. The result is underutilized capacity and power outages. This is a complex matter. Power tariff increase have not always worked. We do not see growth in revenue commensurate with increase in tariff. Years of underinvestment in transmission capacity too is a limiting factor in reliable power supply. Similar constraints exist at the distribution stage. The World Bank considers South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa as the worst regions in the world in duration and frequency of power breakdowns. Within South Asia, unfortunately, Pakistan is the worst performing. In 2015, World Bank estimated that power shortage resulted in a loss of 6.5% of the GDP. This does not include effect of environmental degradation. Unreliable power has disrupted business operations, and according to a survey, has forced hundreds of factories to downsize or shut down. Overall, more than 3/4 of firms identify electricity as a major constraint. SMEs have suffered the most. Lack of power affects citizen welfare. Studies show that households connected to the grid have a host of secondary benefits. They have higher incomes with better education outcomes and women employment rates. Pakistan has high levels of air pollution. Fossil fuel-based power is an important source, as is higher vehicular emissions. We all know about the urban smog or high ground level of ozone that builds up in winter months. Our energy consumption patterns have also caused greenhouse emissions. Government has planned to increase alternate renewable energy as a source of power. So far, it is about 6% of the total. Growth in hydroelectricity is encumbered by capital cost and technical challenges of higher altitudes. Most of these problems are well known, and we as citizens and consumers are familiar with their effect through high prices, load shedding, and the air we breathe. But they are complex issues and cannot be resolved quickly. I know that government has the team in place to address them comprehensively. We look forward to being better informed about government strategy from SAPM, Mr. Nadeem Baba. We also look forward to the comments of Senator Zuberi about her experience with alternate energy and the views of business through the presence of President FPCCI, Mia Anjum Nasab. Renowned expert Dr. Salim Ali will talk about energy and environment. Once again, thank you for being with us. Over to you, Ashraf Saab.
Right, thank you, sir. That was a good overview of the topic today, and if it points to anything, it's the need for government to focus on the real economy and the looming, and for us, all of us, to be aware of the looming challenge of climate change. It's now a special pleasure for me to welcome Mr. Nadeem Baba, Minister of State and Special Assistant to the Prime Minister on Energy. Mr. Baba has a distinguished career in public service and as a corporate executive. In both roles, his achievements are too many to be recounted. Before becoming SAPM, he was member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Committee on Power Sector Reforms, I should have said, and also Chairman, Punjab Power Development Board. He held several other such responsibilities. As a senior industry executive, Mr. Babar has extensive worldwide experience in power generation and in infrastructure and corporate finance. He has developed, financed, and/or managed over 150 power plants of all available technologies. Mr. Babar holds engineering and economics degrees from Stanford and Columbia Universities, and we are fortunate that he's with us today. Welcome, sir. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Ashraf Saab, and thank you, Humayun Saab. Let me begin with some broad-based comments, and then I will go specifically into what are the reforms that the government is working on. First, let's just take a survey. What is happening in our power sector? Historically, our power sector has been marred by a couple of underlying structural issues. Number one, it's really a controlled monopoly by the state itself. And while we did introduce private generators about 20 years ago, all the generators are bound to sell to the state, and then it is the state that onwards sells to the citizens at retail and wholesale level. So we have monopoly issues. The tariff structures have always been cost-based as opposed to efficiency-driven. And in many cases, we've had a situation where the political dispensations have overridden economic considerations and full cost recovery has never been done. And all of those things, together with really poor planning, or in many cases, complete lack of planning, resulted in a mix of energy leading to our power sector being a highly expensive basket of fuels, if you will. All of these things lead to what we call circular debt, high transmission losses, theft, non-recovery. When you look at the petroleum sector, which is the twin of the power sector as far as energy is concerned, the situation is a bit better there, but some of these fundamental issues also are present in the petroleum sector. And the reason the situation is a little bit better there is that most of the state entities are actually listed companies. And while the state holds a large stake in those entities, because they are listed entities and they have to follow certain governance paradigms, their operations and governance is better. And most of them are profit-making entities. But having gone through them in detail and having operated companies all over the world, I can tell you that they are operating far below their potential. But what are the common themes there? The first common theme is, by and large, again, the prices are controlled by the government. And in most cases, there are monopolies. For example, the entire gas sector is a monopoly sector controlled by the government. And so when we look at both of these sectors and we say to ourselves, what do we do to lower the costs and to make energy available to everybody? The 3 or 4 reforms, principles of reforms that jump out is, unless we open these sectors to competition, which drives down the costs and allows the market dynamics to match the demand and supply positions and promotes efficiency through better technology, we will continue to stutter along in this mess of monopolistic or quasi-monopolistic structures where there's really no benefit to any player to try to improve efficiencies, because everything is controlled by the government, all prices are set by the government. And every time a problem arises, in the past what the governments have done is either shove the problem under the carpet or just do a patchwork rather than trying to understand the root causes, or in some cases just throw subsidies at it. So it is this challenge that we have to face when we talk about reforming the sector. And I can tell you that having worked on these reforms now for about a year, year and a half, we really need some fundamental changes in how we run both of these sectors. So now let me tell you what we are doing. I spent nearly a year not just designing the reforms for the power sector and the petroleum sector, but actually coming up with reforms that are implementable and create the market dynamics that can actually further accelerate these reforms. So next 5-7 minutes that I have, I'm going to give you a quick rundown on what we're doing in our sector, similarly what we're doing on the petroleum sector, and then of course I can answer questions later on. On the power sector, there are 5 pillars of reforms that we've identified. The first is we need to lower our generation cost. Now, in order to do that, there are numerous actions we're taking. I'll just mention 3 of them right now for you. Number 1, you may have the news in the last 48 hours that we've gone through all the private power contracts, and we are now going through the same exercise on the government-owned plants. And we have through mutual discussions with the owners of these plants, worked on rationalizing these costs, lowering these costs. I can go into details later on to the extent that I'm able to, but that's the first element of trying to lower the cost at the plant gates. Second thing, we need to change the fuel mix. Humayun Sahab talked about our dependency on thermal fuels. Let me just tell you that when this government took office exactly 2 years ago, 43% of the generation that we were doing in the country was based on imported fuels. Now, when you do that, you are subject to exchange risks. As the exchange rate moved from 120 all the way to 167, practically the cost of that power went up almost 30-35%, completely external reasons, nothing to do with the power sector itself. So we need to improve our fuel mix and increase our dependency on local fuels. What we have set in motion in the way of new renewable energy policy, new hydel projects that we're working on, and further opening up of Tharcoal, our target is that by 2025, we will be looking at 65 to 70% domestic sources, domestic primary sources of energy converting to electricity. And a large part of that's going to be clean energy, which is going to be renewables and hydels. The third element is that we still have a lot of old government plants which are highly inefficient. So we're going to shut those down to lower our generation costs. So that's the first pillar. Second pillar is we really need to do massive surgery on our distribution and transmission system. We lose almost 230 to 240 billion rupees in the distribution and transmission system per year in terms of non-recovery, leakages, thefts. What is the solution? Well, the solution is establishing the writ of the state in far out areas, improving governance, and using technology. But fundamentally, what we need to do is we need to privatize, provincialize, lease out wherever we can, and essentially get the state out of running the business of distribution of electricity to the extent possible. The third pillar that we are working on is really the overall operation of the sector, where to date, the situation has been that the ministry is actually directly controlling all these entities, the roughly 10 distribution companies, the generation plants, the transmission company, all of those have been directly controlled by the ministry in Islamabad. We need to get out of that model. We need to have professional managers, we need to have professional boards, we need to have performance indicators. So really the entire governance paradigm of how this sector has been run in the past, that is in the process of change right now. The fourth area of reforms that we are working on is the regulatory reform. And the regulatory reform really means that we need to create an open trading environment where electricity, from being a monopoly service, actually becomes a traded commodity. More than 50 countries do that. They have moved into that mode in the last 20 years. I personally have done that in 3 countries. There's no reason we can't do that here. And the government is now absolutely certain that that is the only way for the future, and is working on creating an open traded model for electricity where people can sell and buy bilaterally, and the distribution companies that still remain owned by the government are buyers like just any other major buyer. And if we do that, that is really what fosters open competition, and that is what is going to bring down the costs by promoting efficiencies. The 5th pillar I'll talk about, and then I'll move on to petroleum briefly, is that our subsidies are completely untargeted. Historically, what we've done is we have subsidized the rates that show up on your bills. And that effectively means that anybody who can afford to pay the full price, if they simply happen not to use enough units in a particular month, they are actually being subsidized by the state. So we need to get out of this tariff-based subsidy structure and get into a targeted subsidy structure. And there's a lot of work happening on that. The Energy Division is working with the Poverty Alleviation Division to come up with a consolidated database. We have the SAS program database right now. We are merging that with the utility databases, and we will hopefully within 1 year be in a position to target the subsidies to the people who actually need it, as opposed to adjusting the subsidies in the tariff, thereby making anybody eligible for that subsidy if they just happen to use a lesser quantity of energy in any particular month. When I explained all this in a small group headed by the Prime Minister, I gave the example that I have a large house in Lahore, and for about 6 months in the year, my gas bill, because the gas is used only for cooking, is 220 rupees. And that is a crime. We have a large segment of population that needs to pay the full cost of gas. Just to give you a sense of the subsidy built into the gas pricing system, is that about 90% of our domestic users in the country are given some amount of subsidy. 90%, that's a staggering number. 102 billion rupees a year is the subsidy that goes to domestic consumers of gas. We need to change that model. So with that, that's a nice segue for me to move into the petroleum sector. I'll just try to wrap that up in 4 to 5 minutes max. I know I'm probably already over time, but just to give you an overall broad perspective. In the petroleum sector, we have the pipelines, gas pipelines, completely government controlled, total monopoly. We have decided to split the distribution and transmission systems. We'll have one transmission system that will be open access, and the distribution companies will be broken up into smaller units, and some of them may get privatized, some of them may get provincialized, some may remain with the federal government, but effectively we need to separate the distribution and transmission systems and make the transmission open access. Anybody can bring in their gas, they can pay a toll, move their gas through the pipeline system and sell it on a B2B basis. Similarly, on the LNG side, we have completely changed the rules, and we have now allowed private LNG terminals, and we are giving them third-party access on the terminals, so anybody can bring in their own private LNG. This will be effective starting next month. Anybody can bring in their private LNG, you pay a toll and move it through the pipelines and sell it to whoever they wish. So that will again open up the market for not only further investment, but competitive pressures, which will lower the cost and lower the prices and put pressure on these monopoly companies that are today state-owned, that they cannot continue with this reckless abandon of 10, 12, 14% UFGs, which is really a misnomer for the theft and losses. The third sector on the petroleum side is the oil refineries and the midstream and downstream sector. There again, we are completely changing the pricing models of the oil mechanisms. The prices for oil, the major oil products are decided by the government based on what PSO's costs are. There's absolutely no reason why that should continue. So last week we got approval from the cabinet. We are moving away from PSO, essentially setting the prices for the whole market to put some competitive pressure on them. We are talking to the refineries to upgrade. And again, I'm sure many of you have seen, starting 1st of September, all imports of petrol into the country will be Euro 5 standard versus Euro 2 standard. Humayun Sahab talked about smog. Let me just give you some reference points here. Today, our standards are Euro 2 standards. That means 500 parts per million of sulfur. Euro 5 standard is 10 parts per million of sulfur. And we have already started importing Euro 5 as of 1st of August. And after 1st of September, no petrol can be imported unless it is Euro 5. And from 1st of January, no diesel can be imported unless it's Euro 5 compliant. So we are taking major initiatives in improving the quality of the fuel. Of course, our refineries are old and we have to give them some time to upgrade so that they can meet those standards, and that dialogue is ongoing. Let me just briefly touch on LPG, which is the other segment in the petroleum chain, and then I'll close out with exploration and production. Only about 28% of our public gets piped gas. About 30% of our public is dependent on LPG. We need to find ways to increase our domestic LPG production and lower the overall cost of LPG. We call it poor man's fuel. It's really 3 to 4 times more expensive than pipeline. We call it poor man's fuel because poor man is the one who didn't have access to the pipeline, not because they didn't have the ability to buy less. They actually end up paying more for the energy. So we need to lower the cost of LPG. And again, some of you may have followed for the last 4 to 5 months, we've been working on that. And in the next 15 days, we expect a brand new, very futuristic and comprehensive LPG policy to be announced, which will lower the cost of LPG and will make it universally available across the country. Last item I'll talk about is the exploration and production. Unfortunately, in the previous government, this is not intended to be a political statement, but in the previous government's 5-year tenure and 3 months of the interim government, not a single new block for E&P was awarded. The consequence was that our gas production is declining at an average rate of 9.5%. So if we don't change our approach, we will run out of the gas. Forget which province is surplus and which is deficit. We will run out of gas to a point that in 2 to 3 years, we'll not even be able to supply our domestic consumers with domestic gas. So the government has launched into a major initiative. We've completely revamped our policy. We've completely revamped our rules. In the last 18 months, while we were doing all this, we still awarded 10 new blocks. And 1st of September, we are doing an auction of 20 new blocks to be followed by another auction next year of another 20 new blocks. We need to increase our E&P dramatically if we are to reduce the costs of gas and oil for our domestic productions. And the government is working very intensively on that. And you will keep seeing new things coming out in that regard. Let me just conclude with a couple of sentences. The headline or the sub-headline of today's conference was sustainable, affordable, and reliable. I'd like to change that a little bit. When I started working on these reforms about 1.5 years ago, we came up with a phrase, and that was SARA, Sara Pakistan. And the intent of that was that the reforms that we are going to do have to be inclusive, all inclusive for every citizen in the country. And what do those 4 letters stand for? SARA. Sustainable and affordable are the same 2 that you have in your subheading, but the remaining 2, R and A, are slightly different. The third one, we in our reform package, the R we use is responsible use, or what is commonly known as conservation or energy efficiency. And the last A is available. So actually when you call it reliable, we call it available. So we want to make energy available to every citizen of Pakistan. at an affordable price in a sustainable manner, and the use of that energy has to be in a responsible fashion. So we are not wasting our energy away. So it is with these 4 letters, we came up with this reform program, Sara Pakistan, all inclusive, and the planning and all the reforms that we're doing are geared towards that. So I'll stop at that, and later on, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, sir. That was a very impressive and a very complete overview of government's program in the coming years. And I can see that it is based on building more efficiencies into the system. The next speaker is Senator Ruksana Zuberi. Senator Saba combines an accomplished political career with professional achievements. Twice she has been elected to the Senate of Pakistan, and before that, she was member of the Sindh Assembly. She's a mechanical engineer by profession and known for her keen efforts to popularize energy efficiency and conservation in the country. As chairperson, Pakistan Engineering Council and founder chairperson, Women in Energy, she initiated installation of on-grid and off-grid solar systems in major public buildings in Pakistan. In addition to Women in Energy, she's been convener SARC Women in Energy Working Group and member President's Task Force on Alternate Energy Options. She's also been member of the boards of the Hydrocarbon Development Institute and the National University of Science and Technology, and has spent years in practical application of evolving ideas and technologies in the energy sector. I welcome Senator Ruksana Zuberi. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. A very enlightening presentation by Mr. Nadeem Babar. However, I would like to add, he has talked about renewable energy policy reforms, and the focus has to be on renewable energy, which is available in abundance, and we have to make use of it. To make it, it is very cost effective. Also, it is no more an expensive thing. We know that we have hydraulic energy. We have solar energy is also not a new technology, because when the first time a human being went to the moon, this was the energy which was used. But at that time, it was very expensive. Now it is affordable. When I took charge of Engineering Council, my first step was to convert Engineering Council building into an energy efficient building. And for that, we had energy audit, we had to remove some of the walls, we have to have sunlight coming in. And then JICA was seeing that Engineering Council is making standards and specifications and all that. So they came to us and said, we have selected 54 countries for a solar project. We had certain amount available. And they said that we can sponsor and we can give you this project. And at that time, we had 2 first on-grid solar systems. So one is in front of Thoda Sa Nadla se, when you go towards NAB office, is just opposite that on the main road. You see panels. And the second one is at Planning Commission. Now, my concern is that it was 2005 when we started, and we had that. And that is a solution today. Pakistan Engineering Council comfortably is on solar power. Okay, and Pakistan Engineering Council is also initiator of smart grid. Today we know that several thousand organizations have been given a license to to function, to get the solar net metering connected to their system. With the limitation of fixing it, limiting it only for 3-phase connections and not on the 1-phase connection. So that is a limitation. Why I'm saying this is that a long time has passed by, and I don't see much initiatives on putting up solar. As Nadeem Saab has said, that LPG is coming up with a policy on LPG. Abhi jo hamari what energy renewable policy we had, there was a revision on that policy, and we lost about 2 years in revising the new renewable energy policy, which had to add a couple of other renewable energies in addition to hydro and solar and all that. So when we compared the two policies, there was hardly a difference of 2%. So my submission is that work should go on, things should move, and not, because a new policy means it had to go to the cabinet, it had to be approved by them, and then it took a lot of time. And very recently, as of today, I don't have the update, but last time in our standing committee meeting, we were told that it is at the final stages of acceptance or approval. Now, LPG is the answer to far-flung areas and even to the cities. We have put a lot of money in the underground piping, and this money is a waste because there is no integrated planning being followed. It's like one person thinks that his constituency should have a certain facility. He influences or she influences the relevant quarters and get funding for that, and that is approved. And as a result, if you see the people being benefited by the project, and as compared to the money being spent on that project, there is no comparison, and you don't justify it. Second thing is, the first thing any government, including the new government, should have done is concentrate on energy efficiency, concentrate on energy conservation. Even today, if you go even to the government buildings, you see the power-hungry halogen and incandescent lamps. And government is a big consumer of energy. And this could have easily been lowered by having the LEDs, by having a specification and a strict adherence to that for getting energy efficient appliances. Even our domestic appliances, which we are locally making, they are taking more energy than what they are delivering. And I realized that recently when I bought an imported, I don't like to buy imported things, but anyway, I bought a kitchen top, imported kitchen top, and it takes 20% of the time to do a certain job, which goes on my conventional oven. So basically, we are not working on the standards. In our country, we are taking Ministry of Science and Technology as a, it's not given the real importance it should. I believe that that is the solution for us, that Ministry of Science and Technology and Engineering, they should be given due assignments, they should be given due funding so that they come up with the solutions to the country. So far, losses are concerned, they are exorbitant losses. If you see in your own bill, they are big losses, and those losses have to be cut down. And I was surprised when I started with the probe on energy pricing, fuel pricing. That was, our fuel pricing was based on AGN Ghazi's formula. And in this fuel pricing, there were certain factors given and say, okay, this is how you will be charging and all that. Later on, in 2002, this formula was completely taken away by putting additional charges. For instance, steam duty of 10% was charged to diesel. And diesel is the major fuel which we consume. And this extra charge was given on the pretext that we want our refineries to be on modern technology, on Euro 5 and all. And 10% means about an additional of 150 billion rupees to the payers. Okay, but 2002, today is 2020. Not all refineries have been put on the new fuel. Even now, the advisor was saying that we are working on it. Similarly, the oil marketing companies were given higher margins, much higher margins than usual. And these higher margins, they were given because they will increase the storage in the country. And you would see, you know it, when the prices of petroleum products went down in the international market, we were unable to hedge because of unavailability of storage area. So we really have to focus on these are parallel activities going on. We have to have solar. You would see now, you can see on Prime Minister's Secretariat, you could see on Supreme Court, on Bari Imam and all those. Pakistan Engineering Council, we thought that if we do and if we install solar, it will become popular. And those were standalone units, not connected to the grid. Okay, so we thought that it will popularize the use, and policies will be made accordingly so that people get standard products, and even we start making it. But then we realized that things have stopped, and we didn't see much on it. Even when Pakistan Engineering Council was doing this project, we faced a lot of difficulties because they were banned on import of certain things and all that. So my submission is that thank you very much, Humayun Saab, and thank you, Renewable Energy Policy, to invite. There's need for doing many steps much quickly. We have wasted a lot of time. We have wasted a lot of time. We come up with new policies and we say we are reforms and things like that. In the end, what we have seen is that the people of Pakistan, they are burdened more because I will just share a small example with you, and then I'll finish. On these pricing, the Petroleum Committee of the Senate had a subcommittee, and I chaired that subcommittee, and we were of the view that these are additional charges. Even the quality of petrol, what we are charging is much inferior than what was given by the Asian Passing formula. But nothing happened. We did see that motor spread was much higher in sulfur and all, and then high-speed diesel also. And then I went to the Supreme Court that this price should be reduced. And we came to know that even excise duty, which was being charged by the companies, was not being given to government. It was being kept by the refineries, and it was very surprising for all. So later on, I did spend about 5 years going to Supreme Court on every date, preparing for our Supreme Court appearance. You would know how it is. And then the Chief Justice, Honorable Iftikhar Chaudhry, clubbed the petitions on oil pricing and clubbed it with another petition, which was a GST. 1% GST is higher, so it should be lower. And later on, what we saw is all the three petitions, the result was that 1% GST was removed. And it's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, but this has happened. I plan to ask my legal committee in the Senate to take it up because during this time, I was not in the Senate. I couldn't pursue it further. So fuel, in the end, I would submit fuel is a primary, you know, input. Whether it's industry, whether it is big industry, small, so many industries that closed. The cost of fuel is so much that it makes your production very expensive. And we need to take all possible measures without losing much time and make life of our people a little better. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Saab. I think that was a very earnest and reflective of a career spent striving for improvement in the energy sector. We are a little behind time, so I'll shorten some of the introductions. Next speaker is Mia Anjum Nisar Saab, who's President of the Federation of Pakistan Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and a leading business figure with years of successful experience in the private sector. His major interests in the textile and chemical industries. As a keen advocate of economic growth through private enterprise, Mia Saab has had a long association with Lahore Chamber of Commerce and the Federation of Pakistan Chambers of Commerce and Industry. He's widely recognized as an expert on business, trade, and finance matters. We're very happy to welcome Mia Anjum Nisar Saab. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum to everyone. I really thank Mr. Mai Akhtar Khan Saab for having me and all the other speakers. Basically, I'll be talking about the industrial view on the subject. As we all know that the industry is facing a lot of difficulties to survive because of the high cost of energy. If we see Pakistan, if we compare ourselves with the rest of the region, our cost is 15 to 16 cents per kilowatt. If we compare with our region, it ranges between 7 to 9 cents per kilowatt. Basically, the industry is not looking for any subsidy. What we are asking for is we want a level playing field. And we are facing a lot of difficulty to compete, to export, and also to compete with the goods coming from abroad. That's our basic problem. The problem is the IPP complex, and the other major problem is the line losses, the theft, which ranges between 10 to 35% within the country. So, honest, taxpayers are paying this price. And on top of that, all the inefficiencies, what we are having from the supply chain, that is WAPDA or maybe KE, there is line losses, there is theft, there is inefficiencies, there are a lot of trippings. Even the trippings, if in a day, if we just witness 3 or 4 tripping, that also costs a lot. Because just once, if the light goes away, if there is an outrage of light, electricity, and the light comes maybe in the next second, the chain is once stopped. And then in the continuous process, we have a lot of problems. I mean, those are the areas which needs to be taken care of from the, these supply department, that is WAPDA and KE. They should basically monitor, and they should have at least some record that in previous year, if they had 1,000 tripping on a certain feeder, now they have improved the efficiency. Now it has been reduced to 30%, to 40%, to 50%. But that does not cost much. But this is because of the inefficiencies of these departments. Nobody is checking them. Nobody is bothered to check them. And the whole economy is paying these, these cost of inefficiencies. Because by virtue of these efficiencies, what we get, production losses or wastage of what we are producing, that goes high. On one side, the cost is high, and on the other side, these efficiencies. We all know that there are 10 discos in Pakistan, and the electricity line losses are between 10 to 35%. Who is going to take care of these things? I mean, we have been listening, and we know this whole story from the past many, many years. Government does not seem to be bothered. They don't understand how we can maintain the efficiency. How today, there's no rocket science to produce anything. The rocket science is efficiency. This is the demand of today's world, and that's what we are lacking. Yesterday, there was a dispute between some coal shipping agents, shipping terminal, and some importers. So we were doing some sort of arbitration. I knew this story before as well. I myself is also an importer of coal. When we import the coal, the cost is 11.5 cents a ton to import the coal from South Africa to Karachi. Whereas it has come to our knowledge that the IPPs, they are importing these coals at the cost of 14.5 cents, 50 cents. So that means there is a gray area. I do import coal at $60 C&F cost, whereas, the IPPs, they are importing these coal from the very same destination, same origin, at a much, much higher cost. Who's going to check these things? Then most of the, these IPPs unit we installed, they have inflated the capex price because they were insured that they will be getting 17% profit on the equity they have invested. So these are the reasons, some of the major reasons that the price of electricity in Pakistan is much, much, much higher than the rest of the world. Definitely there must be some IPPs in India, in Bangladesh, or in many other countries. But maybe the same companies are working in Pakistan. Why our price is too higher than, others? They are also importing, a lot of fuel from abroad. So we have to stop this thing. Otherwise, industry cannot survive, jobs cannot be created, no matter whatever incentives the government might try to, place in the policy. So what I would request, these all things should be checked. Otherwise, industry cannot compete, export will not rise, trade deficit will increase, we will see more and more joblessness in the country. So I would like to have said many things more, but I will just stop here that we need to stop, and we need to now stop all the bullshit which has happened before. Enough is enough. If we want this country to move ahead, we have to stop these things. Otherwise, our economy cannot flourish. Jobs would not be increased. Our Prime Minister says that he is going to bring 10 million jobs. What we are seeing something otherwise. So industry is already faced with the FTAs and the PTAs, what the government has already signed. The tariffs are zero in many cases. So what I will request and demand from this forum and the responsibles, that kindly look into these gray areas so that our costs should come more or less at the regional level, so the industry could move ahead. Thank you very much.
जी बहुत शुक्रिया President साहब, thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. Salim Ali. For 20 years, he's been practicing, teaching, and researching in the fields of energy and environmental science. He is the Distinguished Professor of Energy and Environment at the University of Delaware's Joseph R. Biden School of Public Policy, and is a Senior Fellow at Columbia University's Center for Sustainable Investment, as well as at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. Professor Ali is also a member of the Scientific and Technical Advisory Panel of the Global Environment Facility at the United Nations Environment Programme. Earlier, he directed a research center on mining and sustainable development at the University of Queensland in Australia. He's also been on the faculties of the University of Vermont and Brown. Salim Ali has also worked in the corporate sector, having been part of General Electric's Technical Leadership Program. He's written or co-authored 4 books on various aspects of sustainable development policy. Dr. Salim Ali studied chemistry and environmental sciences at Tufts, Yale, and MIT. From MIT, he earned a doctorate. We look forward to a specially informed discussion on climate change and sustainable policies. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Saab. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hayat, and also Mrs. Hayat for organizing this event. Thank you to Mr. Humayun Khan. It's a pleasure to connect with my homeland. I approach the topic with humility. Those of us who are in the diaspora have to be very conscious that we are removed from the scene. Though I did try to do my homework to make sure I'm aware of the latest developments. I did read the recent report on alternative renewable energy, as well as the NEPRA State of the Industry report. This diagram, which I have behind me in my Zoom screen, is from one of those reports. And it was very heartening to see that there is a highly developed institutional structure around energy planning in Pakistan. Though I might note that on this diagram, for some reason, one of the organizations that I think is particularly important, the National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, was not mentioned, and I think it's a particularly important entity. I'd also like to acknowledge the managing director of that entity, Dr. Sardar Muazzam, who is actually a distinguished alumnus of the University of Delaware, where he did his PhD. He gave me a quick update as well on some of the efforts there. So just a few points, because we are a bit over time and I'd love to hear questions and have more discussion. I'll just bring out a few points which I think we should pay attention to. One of the issues is that, we need a systems approach to looking at energy from the point of view of both what we call energy density, as well as the level of efficiency, not just of the efficiency of the operating system, but the efficiency of where we can get the resources most effectively. Now, this is where it becomes very politically tenuous, because there is the conversation around energy security, which Babar Saab very admirably mentioned, that there is an interest which the government has to have more self-reliance so that we are not dependent on external sources for energy. But what we do have to realize is that sometimes when we're trying to do that, we end up with more inefficiency because we are dependent on the natural resource endowment that we are given geologically. And so sometimes that means that we're going to end up with an ecologically inefficient outcome. So the best possible approach from a market perspective, and going back to comparative advantage kind of research, the best option would be that we are able to get energy security through better alliances internationally, as well as being able to have resilience within our own system. So I think that should be the way in which we approach our energy planning, that we don't just focus on energy security domestically, but that we do build better international relations so that we can get more ecologically efficient resource usage. Now, this also brings me to the point of seasonality. Pakistan's climate is such that we have a huge disparity between the summer and the winter demand. And during the winter months, we have excess capacity, which is often wasted or not used, is a better way of saying it. What can we do to better harness that? There are some ideas that have been proposed. One of which I heard recently about is that we could use that capacity to develop a hydrogen economy during the winter months, to be able to use electrolysis to actually harness hydrogen from water and then use that hydrogen for some specific kinds of tasks. Hydrogen is not going to be able to compete with e-mobility anymore. I think there is clear consensus that electric vehicles are much more the dominant technology when it comes to individual commercial vehicles. However, for trucking, hydrogen may well have a future. And so if we are able to produce hydrogen during the winter months, that's a possibility. The other possibility is if we were more integrated regionally with grids, we could sell electricity in the winter. We do have neighbors who do need a lot of electricity in the winter because they have colder climates. And so that could be a possibility. It's also a way by which we could improve our international relations. And that should be something that what we call energy diplomacy is something that we should explore. Of course, this has been tentatively explored through pipeline projects like TAPI, which is still sort of buzzing along, though it's been impeded by various security concerns. But those are points which shouldn't be neglected. There has been in the past initiatives that have tried to move that idea forward. I think we should still keep those, and I hope the government, which has had a very positive attitude in many ways towards regional peace, should consider those. So that's another point I wanted to note. Finally, with regard to the issue of our grids, I think the losses aspect has been very cogently discussed already, and the work of Senator Zuberi is really admirable, that to have public servants who are able to spend so much time and effort to really drive home these issues is remarkable and gives me great hope for Pakistan's future. I think what we do need in the grid situation, apart from the efficiencies and improving those, is thinking about smart grids, thinking about storage in particular areas, which is going to be more likely to be effective in some of our rural areas. This has been done at a boutique level with Asian Development Bank funds and other sources. But I think we need to upscale it far more. A few years ago, our university, we worked on a grant proposal to the MacArthur Foundation, which was focused on smart grids in Nigeria. And the dean of our School of Engineering is from Nigeria. Nigeria in many ways has very similar kinds of interesting dynamics as Pakistan. It's a developing country with a very large population and an even higher population growth rate than us, and has similar kinds of rural energy challenges. I think the same kind of approach, we could try and see how it can be more applicable in certain parts of Pakistan. Finally, I'll just make a point around the same way with the grid, that the pipeline infrastructure for Pakistan's energy, it's something that deserves more attention as to where pipelines are likely to be most effective. Now, I take Babar Saab's point very well that the cost of pipelines, gas is much less than using LPG and other sources, but the issue is the infrastructure capital investment and the maintenance cost, the danger of fugitive emissions from pipelines is enormous. So you want to have pipelines where they're going to be most effective in terms of energy density. Of the year in Murray, and it's wonderful that Murray now has piped natural gas. That's a really useful place to have piped natural gas, because a lot of the year you use gas for heating. And so you're going to be using that in a much more effective, efficient way rather than using electric heating. But to have natural gas in other areas, in remote rural areas where the population density may not be as high, it may not be as fruitful. It may win political points, but it may not be as useful. So what we have to think about doing then is to reduce the cost of those other kinds of more adaptable fuels. So those are just some points I'd like to share. I did have one slide I want, and this is just a parting slide I wanted to show, because oftentimes, in Pakistan particularly, I do hear all too often people say, "Ji, ye kya aap energy ki baatein kar rahe hain, logon ke paas khana nahi hai khane ko," and people always like make priorities. And each priority, one person dishes the other's priority. So this is a slide I wanted to share. There was an effort at the turn of the millennium to prioritize what are the biggest global problems. And Nobel laureate Richard Smalley, who was a professor at Rice University, he died sadly too young of cancer, but he came up with this priority ranking, which really stuck with everyone. And what so he put down the different kinds of things we talk about. You know, we talk about terrorism and all these other things. He put energy right at the top. And the reason he did that, you know, he was a chemist. He had studied entropy. He had studied all of the thermodynamic aspects of how our planetary system and indeed the universe works. And he noted that energy essentially is the cascade through which, it's at the top of the cascade through which all of these other factors are going to also have some kind of impact. So I'd leave you with that and to say that the work that's being done is essential in terms of driving home all of those factors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Salim Ali. Thank you very much for the time that you've taken. It's still relatively early in your part of the world, and for the excellent discussion. And I'll open the discussion for questions. Before I do so, a couple of requests. We all know how Zoom works, of course, by now, the last 3 or 4 months. But in case you don't, please do raise your hand. And the way to do that is you go to the, if you scroll down, you click on the participants tab, and you will see either a panel open to the right or a box pop up, and there's a raise hand icon there. So although some of you have texted me that you want to ask a question, but I do request you to raise your hand. The other thing is that we do have a lot of interest, as I can see from WhatsApp messages that I've received. So my request is to be short and to so that we can accommodate as many people as possible. And also to identify the speaker whom you have addressed your question to. Thank you. I'll go to Ali Habib first. Yes, Ambassador, I see you, but Ali Habib.
All right. So I'm Ali Habib. I represent a small firm in Pakistan, Himavert. It's a social enterprise. And we represent a global non-profit class that specifically works on energy efficiency standards for appliances. So my question or sort of request is to Mr. Nadeem Babar and Senator Zuberi. It's a specific request, but I think it's a strategic request and an opportunity that we have. So I'll start my request by saying that basically we are on a positive sort of momentum in terms of the National Energy Efficiency and Conservation Authority, which I'm happy Dr. Salim Ali pointed out. Our firm works with them. We've worked for the last couple of years and helped set labeling standards for electric fans, for electric motors, and in future we're planning to help them with gas water heaters. The request is that there are a couple of individuals who are strong professionals putting in an excellent effort, but unless the political leadership, and that's why I talked to Mr. Babar and Senator Zuberi, you have to protect these people in a political manner, because there are many complications that you have to hold the bull by the horns. There's an organization called the Pakistan Standards and Quality Control Authority, which unfortunately has become so dysfunctional that it had standards for electric motors and gas water heaters many years ago, which no one follows. So basically everything illegal is being sold. And NICA is a well-run professional organization, has prepared standards. So somehow you need to allow NICA the space to interact with the industry. Even the market is ready to adopt these standards, but PSQCA bothers them with the rent-seeking mentality that often happens when our government organizations senes. So that is my request and question. How can you help NICA hold off all the wolves in the other dysfunctional government departments?
Thank you, Ali Habib. You didn't identify yourself as until recently, the head of the Worldwide Fund. I'll go to Ismail Qureshi and then Ambassador Ashraf Jahangir Qazi.
Okay, thank you. My question is for both Mr. Nadeem Baba and Senator Zuberi. I must say, the impressive proposed reform framework is both ambitious and long-term. I know Mr. Baba, he has been involved in this sector for very long. Mashallah, has a lot of experience, and we value that very much, especially that he has good understanding of both the private and the public sector. Now, my two brief comments or questions, as you think. One of the major challenges in the public policy making is to ensure buy-in from the major stakeholders or the stakeholders and the continuity of the policy. I would like to hear from both. What are their thoughts about that, this issue, particularly which belongs to the political economy and given our political polarization. So how best can they handle that? Because I'm sure there are going to be lots of pushbacks and challenges. Second question regard Karachi Electric. Now, I think this is a classic case of elite capture. Both previous and the present government seem somewhat reticent to take on the KE to accept their obligations and the poor consumer, the one who are suffering. So I would like to hear from both what are the things in their mind to handle and address this issue.
Thank you, Ismail. Ambassador Ashraf Jahangir Qazi. Go ahead, sir.
All right. First of all, I'd like to congratulate the chairman and Director General Ashraf, my hamnam and good friend, over this truly excellent occasion in which we've had extremely informed expert analysis and presentations, which are a great benefit to us all in understanding a very important subject. I would beg your indulgence to allow me 2 minutes or so to make a few comments, contextualizing the energy picture within our climate change commitments. As was said by Professor Saib, that energy is top of the list, and I wouldn't dare seek to amend what a Nobel laureate would say, but I would say that energy needs to be seen now, increasingly now, in the context of climate change. And so you'll forgive me if my presentation sort of proceeds along those lines. I hope it'll just be 2 minutes. It's correctly said that Pakistan is an insignificant contributor to climate catastrophe, but it will be among the most early and significant victims of it. Globally, this is true. But locally, Pakistan is a significant contributor to the state of its own climate and environment. So Pakistan needs to be in line with proposed global trajectories to reduce the imminent prospect of death by climate catastrophe. Currently, I understand, renewables are around 5% of our energy mix, and we expect this proportion to rise to 30% by 2030. That still leaves a larger percentage of non-renewables and carbon-emitting sources of energy. So is a highly vulnerable Pakistan part of the global goal of getting to a carbon neutral and then carbon zero state by 2050? If this hugely ambitious target is not met, I understand climate change will enter into an irreversible adaptation phase in an ever-warming planet with its indescribable and lethal consequences. A global Green New Deal is regarded by a scientific consensus as the only way to even begin to meet this challenge. So is our targeted energy mix part of a Pakistan Green New Deal commitment, which is a much larger project than tree plantation, etc., which is of course part of it. A PGND, Pakistan Green New Deal, would need to be a national transformation project which would require transformation in national priorities and allocation of national resources. It is essentially a political project for national survival. Are our governance, security, economic, social, interprovincial, energy, budgetary, educational, public information, and external policies aligned with such a national survival imperative? Given the immediacy and uncertainty of the COVID-19 pandemic, the short-term nature of our decision-making, and the quality of our national politics, can we make this unprecedented challenge the overarching focus and priority of our national policy? Specifically, can the timelines for our alternate and renewable energy policy be significantly brought forward to meet the requirements of a Pakistan Green New Deal? Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. I'm trying to go according to the order in which I saw the raised hands. So, Shahnawaz Rahmatullah Javed.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Can you hear him, sir?
Yes, I can. Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. So my question is regarding, let me introduce myself, sir. I'm Shahnawaz. I'm working for ENP sector in upstream sector of Pakistan. My question with Nadeem Babar Saab is regarding offshore exploration in Pakistan. Since we used to have bidding process in offshore and award these blocks to companies, different companies, whosoever wins. But we see the progress in offshore blocks is not that we expect companies to do. So my suggestion is that we must award contracts in shape of what you say consortium, like Azerbaijan has awarded its offshore blocks to the companies. It's comprises of so many companies, and they are working with their zeal and dedication. So my suggestion will be the awards will be on consortium, and they must be very responsible and time accountable, so that they may give us result. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Shahnawaz. Rahmatullah Javed sir, please go ahead, sir.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you for this excellent webinar on the energy, and I believe that it is a very, very important factor of our economy. I like to confirm the concern raised by my President Federation, Anjum Nisar, because he has given the complete picture of the energy, because it is very expensive, and we are working, in these, due to this, our exports are not rising. I am a representative of SMEs. Pakistan is a country of SMEs. We have 3.8 million small and medium enterprises, and I believe to understand, due to the quantity of these enterprises, our share in the export is much more than like 45%. But you will see that the energy cost is making problems, and we are not in a position to produce more. And at this stage, I would like to ask these policymakers, because they are making excellent suggestions, proposals, because they have lifetime experience and their voice is heard all over. You people can. Yeah, I would like to say that the energy cost for SMEs must be subsidized if we want to continue with this, because it's already been said that we, from hydro to thermal, we have lost the share. Major share is on thermal or otherwise, and that is costly. These alternates proposed here are coming, and they are going to be wonderful in the future. But what to do now? We need our export to be risen now. We need badly. For that, I will see that the government should come up for special initiatives for SMEs. Today's business recorder says that IPP have come to a settlement. What settlement they have come to? Because they have been charging huge, big cost, which is unbelievable. And I believe that some settlement points may be known to the trade and industry, so that we may continue to work. I would only, every time we say that we are paying the cost of those people who are not paying their bills for the electric or the gas. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you. I need to ask the speakers, we have another 12 minutes or 11 minutes left, but if you allow me, I have seven people, there are 7 people who want to ask a question, and if you allow me, can we go ahead and name them so that, and then we will close, we won't have any more questions. Nadeem Babar Saab, या कोई भी speaker अगर मुझे advise करे, we will proceed accordingly, sir.
I mean, it appears that most of the questions are directed towards me. I'm happy to answer, and I'm happy to go beyond our time limit. I'm available till about 8 o'clock, so go ahead, collect the questions.
All right, thank you. We have 6 or 7 more names. Dr. Manzoor is next. Uske baad Salman Akhtar Saab hai. I mean, this is the order in which I've seen the raised hands. If I'm wrong, please excuse me. Dr. Manzoor, Salman Akhtar, Faizullah Niazi.
Can I go ahead?
Yes,
okay. There are two quick questions. One about K Electric, which Ismail Niazi also raised. You see, we have had Shanghai Electric running after government of Pakistan, trying to put in about $10 billion. And they've been doing this from 2016. And why don't we, first we don't get any investment, and somebody's going to put investment, and we are just putting them, sending them from one ministry to another. It's been 4 years. That's my first question. My second question is that at this moment, LNG is extremely cheap, and we have spare capacity to process in our second terminal. And the private sector, fertilizer plants, this the CNG Association, Housing Society, they are keen to get it, but we don't allow them access to that second terminal. We could really get cheap energy and meet our needs. And these are 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Manzoor. Very good. Salman Akhtar Saab.
Ji, thank you. 2 questions for Nadeem. This is regarding the discos and the reforms you're talking about over there. So you mentioned 2 reforms. One was to put in professional boards and to improve the governance. While that's a necessary step, I suspect it's not sufficient given the lack of management talent and capacity within the discos as they exist today. So, how are you thinking about addressing that? And that, I think, segues into the next question, which is really, why not be done with it and just privatize the whole lot? And is there a timeline for doing that? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Faizullah Niazi.
Sir, I have one question regarding policy planning and management and continuity and consistency in the policy of government of Pakistan and sustainability issues in project management at different level in the realm of project management. So there are various issues in energy sector from policy level to implementation and from recovery of the bills and to the outages and transmission line. And there should be some sort of monitoring, effective monitoring and monitoring level and evaluation at government level, and other stakeholders also should have some sort of coordination for better results and better outcome for the consumer purposes. Thank you so much.
They're doing it, but let's see. Dr. M. Iqbal Anjum.
Yes, thank you. My question is addressed to Babar Nadeem Sahab, and that is in the context of emphasis of the government on CPAC program, and CPAC is allowed to be investing in Pakistan in the coal-powered, electricity plants. So there is a lot of emphasis on this, but it has environmental implications. So what is the policy of the government of Pakistan to protect the quality of the environment? This is one thing. Second is that you said there is monopoly, in the energy sector in Pakistan, and there are inefficiencies due to that. So you suggest that there should be, for reducing costs and for ensuring access to everybody, access of electricity to everybody. So it need to be privatized. But, the situation caused by, the reliance on the private sector in, provision of electricity through K Electric, Karachi Electric. So there is a mess there. So there is the private sector is also inefficient, So what is the solution?
Okay,
Thank you so much.
Good, thank you. Dr. Shaukat Hamid, G.S. Sabri, and then Wasim Bora. We have to end there, please.
A fascinating discussion. You covered a very wide range of subjects. All the speakers have done that. But I have a few questions, some comments. First of all, the targets set by the present government are not really very realistic. To give you an example, is what 50, 60,000 megawatts by 2030 or 2040 or 2050 they talk about? See this in the context of Malaysia. If we want to have the same per capita electricity as available as Malaysia, we need 180 to 200,000 megawatts of generation capacity. That is one factor. Our average at the moment is about 500, 600. Malaysia is about 4,500. Number one. Number two, because, and even with 60,000 megawatts as a targeted figure, there's a great opportunity for engineering here. There's $230 billion worth of investment required and businesses to come. And of this, 15% are already within the capacity in Pakistani industry. And even if you go for turbines, electrics, control rooms, the nuclear powers in Pakistan have their own control rooms. They make their own heat exchangers and so on. And many other things are being made in Pakistan. So there's a lot of opportunities here, and nobody's discussed that. Now about pricing. We talked about LNG, importing. Now I see this in the context of the basic question. The government must make up its mind. Is it going to be the public sector? Is it going to be the private sector? Or public-private partnership? The last I am against very much. This was an old story put around by the World Bank in the 90s. 10 years later, they recanted, they said they made a mistake, and I can give you more details about that. Now, transboundary imports, TAPI has been mentioned. Now, this reminds me of, what was that, the American oil baron, and he said that if you want to control energy in the world, it is not the source of energy that you control, it is the shipment that you control. And TAPI will be a classic example. I've been through the contract. I don't know how many people here have read this. Now, it comes through Afghanistan. And who does the maintenance? Who does the operation in Afghanistan? The Indians. I think it's a Reliance group that is going to do that. Now, the Iran-Pakistan pipeline, the Trans-Iran-Pakistan pipeline became the IPI going to India. And the Indians walked away. They said, we don't trust Pakistan. Now, do we trust India to allow this to come through Afghanistan to us? Efficiency. We are operating at very low efficiencies, low capacity factors. And the one reason is everybody talks about management skills, not about operational skills. And this is where the manpower comes in at a middle and lower level. And that is sadly missing in Pakistan. Renewable energy. Renewable energy is the average, it doesn't work without feed-in tariffs. Give you the example of Germany. They've got about 7,000 megawatts of wind power installed there. They announced that they're going to shut down nuclear power. Agreed. But you know what they do? During peak power, they import it from coal in Poland and other places. So, and renewable energy, wind, for example, solar, for example, to give you, I'll just give you a very simple number. The solar, you need about 7%, something like returns on investments. And for it to be sustainable over a reasonable period of time. Solar is only 4. Wind is about 18 to 19 offshore wind. Onshore wind is about 9. Only gas, coal, and nuclear can give you base load. Hydro in Pakistan doesn't give base load. It will not give base load. Why? Because it is tied up with agriculture. It's seasonal. Therefore, it's, let's say, capacity factor.
Many more people want to ask questions.
It's something somebody mentioned about smog and so on. Well, we are the cleanest energy producer in South Asia. The dependence on coal is very small. I looked at figures, this is 10 years old, coming from when we have this smog, the winters in December and January. Look at satellite pictures. They all come from India. India is about 60 to 70%, 60,
Right,
more than 60.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
I'm saying there's a lot of things to look into.
Right, exactly. There are.
What are the thing about
But the
pricing?
speakers, their time has to be respected.
LNG we buy from Qatar. Why don't we go for Japanese crude coal factors? Factors down by factor of 2. And even now, coal imported, oil, gas imported from the, what is this hub in America? It is cheaper in India to travel all the way than to come from Qatar to Pakistan. So there are many factors to look at.
Right.
I'll just stop.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Sabri Saab, I know that you were given to a little bit of extravagance yourself, so could we keep it short? G.S. Sabri Saab, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Ashraf Yab. I'll try to be as brief as possible, but with almost about 40 years of experience, I can't resist talking.
Go ahead, please.
I would seek the attention of Mr. Naveed Babar in particular. You see, sir, I will just submit that this is not the time. In fact, I'm not criticizing the present government. We have been going through policy revisions every 2 or 3 years. That is not the purpose. The purpose is that whatever policies are there, if we implement them, the implementation is the biggest problem. We have not done that. We have the regulators. We don't have good regulators there, be it may Agra, be it may NABRA or anything else. You see, likewise, Dr. Zuberi is not here, though we have always had a different opinion with her in my initial 20 years of service. But I must endorse a couple of things, and which I've been saying. So, okay, let us not go in for gas distribution to new towns. One of our very valid, the person here, he mentioned about suppliers of gas to money. You see, this is what is all the additional cost like. We should not be doing this. We should be putting in the LPG there. And we did a number of feasibility studies and comparative what is desirable for gas. And let me just say, even if it's going along with the SARA, SCRA, SARA program, if we develop on R only, which is the conservation, you see, our losses, I will not, because we don't have time, I just make a couple of submissions. Let us try to reduce the own use and losses. They used to be in good old days from 4 and 4.5%. Now they are almost over 20% plus. If we reduce this, I would very humbly urge, let us not go into keep on changing policies. Implementation is what is needed. So the own use losses, exploration. We have not done, licenses don't matter, sir. Licenses don't matter. Licenses, any new license, it takes about 5 to 10 years to explore, and then another 10 to 20 years to develop if there is a good field. My submission is that whatever we have done, I have a very strong faith that Pakistan in particular and Balochistan in general, we are full of energy resources. We should try that. And a typical example of that is in the north, when this Karak block and Kohad block, you see that once it was discovered, we have got almost about, I think, 10 to 12 exploration blocks there. So these are all primarily which is needed. The LNG terminal, there's a lot to be talked about LNG terminal. The point is, if the terminals are there, and if you are unable to use it, like we had the LPG terminal there, which was bought over, it will frustrate the investors. Let us not go into having so many terminals. We have got enough terminals. The point is that the transmission lines have got to be updated, which have got to be upgraded with the existing availability of domestic resources. That is what I would humbly submit.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
I know that you're full of good ideas, and I know that you're easily accessible also. Wasim Vora Saab. Wasim Vora Saab, I'll request you to bilkul chota comment rakhein. Thank you, sir.
Okay. I am from Federation Pakistan Chambers of Commerce Industry, former Vice President, doing business and industry in Karachi since last 40 years. My experience with the energy supplies from government sources is same as, my views are same as mentioned by Mr. Nadeem Babar, that the monopoly is the government monopolies, and government monopolies are really most inefficient. It is time that we remove those monopolies and become efficient as soon as possible. Otherwise, our exports, our industry, our unemployment is will be a much bigger problem. Please concentrate on local resources. Karachi has a major resource, and I believe that this is the 20,000 tons of waste that Karachi produces, and we can convert this waste into energy and electricity. It is time that we realize as soon as possible what the world is doing, and we follow those principles, keeping in view the renewable energy sources of wind. This is a great resource in Sindh. We need to concentrate on renewable energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for respecting the time. Junaid Mohammed, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. First of all, for inviting me. I am right now talking from south of France. I am doing PhD in the final stages. Basically, I am assistant professor in Quaid-e-Azam University, Islamabad, and my area is services management and marketing. I'm sorry I'm not the expert of energy, but I want to ask a question or rather a comment specifically for Nadeem Babar Saab. Sir, the good policy making from Pakistan, we have seen a lot. And the Korean implementation on the plan of Pakistan is a deja vu. My humble submission is that the Nadeem Babar Saab policy can only be implemented if we go for the procedure to implement that policy. And by procedure mean, I want to ask, have you developed or you are thinking to develop the measurement metrics which give us the data to follow and to monitor the progress and to have a check on the responsible person who are on those particular phases or the positions, so that if they are delivering, they can be rewarded. Otherwise, the responsibility can be fixed. Shortly saying, you mentioned in January, we are going to start this for the first time in the history of Pakistan, the Eurofuel, this, that. Always a policy look good. But being a management student, in short term, in medium term, in long term planning, can we see certain measurement metrics? If it is work, that's good. I want to appreciate. Otherwise, maybe you can take an input from professors from US who are giving a very good, you can say, thought-provoking talk, that whatever the policy is, my submission is, there should be the measurement metrics to see the result. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. We just have two more. Seher Saba hai and S. Rizvi. And again, my request for you to be short. Go ahead, Seher Saba. Seher Rahman.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. It's just a quick question. It's just that in Pakistan you have so much sun, so it would be better to use solar energy. So what's the government policies on solar energy? I mean, it's a cheaper way of providing energy.
Of course. Thank you. Rizvi, go ahead. You'll have to be sure.
Well, first let me compliment you for such an excellent webinar. And my question is for Mr. Babar. And we all want greener, cheaper, and reliable energy. Like this is our desire. In this regard, lots of things are available to us: solar, hydroelectric, biomass, wind, waves, nuclear. Right. So my question to Mr. Babar is about a policy. I live in Leicester. There is a county which is Oadby and Wixton. There, what the county council has done, it is supplying free solar panels to the houses. So I feel that now about the grid distribution and everything, when you try to make the distribution longer, there'll be a lot of 40,000 villages, which I was reading an article, will have to be bypassed. So, or it will have to be reached. So if you reach it, you are expending a lot of money to reach those villages. Why don't we, as a national policy, go for the solar as a greener recourse to solving this problem, and make sure that at the local level, at where we can manage it, we are more solar reliant. And this was for the government policy. And the second thing which I would like to ask Dr. Salim, very interesting, in fact, to hear from him about the hydrogen, from the hydrogen coming from the water, and then is it commercially viable or feasible, or economy of scale? At what stage the research is?
Okay, good. Thank you all very much for those good questions. I'm sorry, the SAPM has the bulk of the questions, and I see that he's been taking notes. Thank you very much, sir. We'll start with you, then we'll go to Dr. Salim Ali, Senator Ruksana, Zuberi, and the President of PCCI. And then I'll ask Humayun Saab to close the meeting. SAPM Saab, please go ahead, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Ashraf Saab. I have a very long list of questions, but I see 4 or 5 common themes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to address those themes. And if I do not specifically cover somebody's question, I'm happy to come back to that. But otherwise, if I go person by person, question by question, is going to take me at least an hour. But the common themes will address a lot of the questions. So let's start with, and I'll sort of jump back and forth. Let's start with the renewable energy policy. Ambassador Kazi mentioned something. I think perhaps there is a lack of clarity or understanding, and maybe it's our fault that we could not clarify it. When we say renewable energy targets, we do not include hydel in it, whereas in the world, hydel is included in it. So now let me give you numbers. The ARE policy that was finally approved by the Council of Common Interests about 10 days ago, the alternate and renewable energy policy, that sets renewable energy targets, 20% of the total system by 2025 and 30% by 2030. These numbers do not include hydel. If you add hydel, which is about 35%, then by 2030, we will have clean energy, hydel and renewable, that is more than 65%. If you add nuclear to it, which is non-thermal by any global classification, that's another 10%. So by 2030, we will have 75% generation that is non-thermal, non-carbon emitting. Now, let me come back to whether that's realistic, whether it's going to happen, and what does it cover. Today, we have 6% of our system as renewable energy, which is mostly wind and solar. The new policy that we've come up with includes waste to energy, includes geothermal, includes storage, includes batteries, includes hydrogen, includes everything that is non-fossil fuel and non-nuclear. Essentially, it covers all of those technologies. So there was a comment about Karachi. Yes, absolutely. Under this policy, we already have 5 applications for waste to energy for the city of Karachi, for Lahore, for Rawalpindi, for Faisalabad. We have a lot of companies interested in following through on that. I will also touch on Ismail Qureshi Saab's comment that partly touched on this issue. This is the first time ever that we've actually made a policy with consultations in every province, with the industry, with academia, with the provinces, and with general public. We did 6 months of open consultations, numerous consultations. And our intent, certainly in the energy sector, is that we will continue to do that for every new policy we come up with, so that we have a complete stakeholder buy-in in all the new policies that we come up with. I will also mention, and this sort of borders on the implementation of policies and some comments earlier, which I take as valid comments, that policies are made but not implemented. Well, you need to realize that when policies are made and not implemented, it is either because there is lack of buy-in, as Ismail Qureshi sir was asking, or there is the system within the government function is not there to follow through and get things to conclusion. Another question that was raised. So let me tell you that I've been dealing with the government in one form or another for a good 30 years now, mostly from abroad, but for the last 10 years sitting here. This is the first time I have actually seen 100% buy-in from the Prime Minister down to the ministries and the entire political dispensation in between. We do, however, have a problem, which is this quote-unquote fear of NAB, that people at the working level, they just don't want to touch anything. They'd rather not do anything, and we have to get past that. But as far as the political buy-in is concerned for these reforms, and as far as the industry and stakeholder buy-in is concerned for these reforms, it is 100% there. Let me tell you, I have not seen this kind of commitment in the past. I'll give you certain examples. We talked about Euro 5. We have started implementing Euro 5. So by 1st of September, after 1st of September, not a single cargo can come in that would not be Euro 5 for petrol. And on January 1st, the same thing happens for diesel. As of today, today is 15th of August, about 50% of our cargoes that have come in this month are already Euro 5. And as I said, by 1st of September, it'll be 100% compliance. So we have put in some systems. I'll also mention something else that borders on the question that we talked about in terms of NICA and efficiency. Dr. Ali is absolutely correct. NICA was not on that chart. It should have been on that chart. NICA or its predecessor entity, what was called Enercon, was essentially a dead entity for a long time. Wasn't really doing anything. We have revived that entity here. We have staffed that entity. Sardar Muazzam, who is a PhD from University of Delaware, he's the head of that. And I have given him a task on energy conservation where he is to do gas audit of all the captive units in the country. This is a decision by the cabinet that we cannot waste our gas in low efficiency units. That decision by the cabinet had been there for 5 years, 6 years, never implemented. We have updated that decision, put in new energy standards, efficiency standards, and starting end of this month, energy audits will start in the entire industry. It'll take us 8 to 10 months to do the entire industry. So we are putting systems in place to monitor what the decisions are. And on that score, I'll just give you one other comment, that every 2 weeks, we have a cabinet committee on energy where the implementation status of all decisions is taken. So at the subcommittee level of the cabinet, every 2 weeks, we go through all decisions relating to energy that were taken and what is the status of that. Never happened before. So that's one theme on alternate energy. And I'll just close that by saying there were a lot of comments about why don't we promote solar. Of course, we are promoting solar. Solar and wind are what we consider the future to be. We started out with typical feed-in tariffs like was done in Europe and America and Japan. Now we are literally at those rates that are comparable to our region, adjusting for our financial costs. So the last set of solar tariffs and wind tariffs that have been approved are down to 3.5 to 4.5 cents. Comparable to any other country of similar dynamics and similar economic factors. There was a comment made that why aren't we importing enough solar panels? Just to give you a sense, we imported 2,500 megawatts worth of solar panels in the last 4 years. Only 450 of that went into grid supply. The remaining 2,000 went into individual use, rooftops, individual use solar panels. So we are opening that up, and it is happening at a large scale. And another thing that I'm happy to report to all of you, if you read this new ARE policy that has just been launched, there is a whole section in it that talks about manufacturing of this equipment, manufacturing of wind turbines and manufacturing of solar panels. I'm happy to report to you that 3 very large manufacturers out of China of solar panels and 1 large manufacturer of wind turbines out of Europe have already approached us to set up manufacturing facilities in Pakistan under this policy. Now let me turn to 2 other broad themes that were talked about. One theme is the cost of power and this whole situation about IPPs, and one theme is Karachi Electric. And then I'll go specifically to the few things that and a third theme is LNG. I'll cover those 3 themes, and then if there's anything specific I've missed out, I'll try to touch that and then close. On IPPs, it's sadly become a fashion to blame everything on IPPs. And yes, there is some blame to be apportioned. But let me give you some numbers that some of you, if you don't know them already, you will be shocked. You know the total capacity payments we make, which are the fixed payments we make other than the cost of fuel. 48% of that capacity payment goes to government's own plants. Only 23% goes to what we traditionally call private IPPs. And the remaining goes to CPEC projects. So what is our issue? Our issue, we can look at the issue in multiple facets. But if I look at today's number, the cost, our average cost of generating a kilowatt hour, just the fuel part, that average today is about 5 rupees. Add on top of that the fixed costs that have to be paid to all the generators. And that number used to be about 3.5, 4 rupees. Today, it is about 5.5 rupees, and it is projected to go up to about 7.5 rupees in the coming years. Why? Because we have signed up agreements to add more capacity, mostly government's own capacity and mostly CPEC capacity, where we have fixed payments due. Our fuel cost has gone down 2 rupees compared to what it was a few years ago, but our fixed costs have gone up almost 3-4 rupees and continue to rise. Now, why is that a problem for us? But before I get to that problem, let's just add these 2 numbers. So the average cost of generation in the entire country at the plant gates is around 10.5, 11 rupees. Then you add about 1.5 rupee of true transmission and distribution cost, not losses, true cost. You get to about 12.5 rupees, let's say. Then you add on top of that the losses and the non-recovery of 27, 28%. You gross it up. Your cost of delivery of that service today to the consumer doorstep is about 15.5, 16 rupees. Are we recovering 15.5, 16? No, we are not. So what are we doing? Historically, what we have done is that rather than charging on disincentivizing consumption and supporting and promoting production, we've done exactly the reverse. We are charging very low to the domestic consumers, and we are balancing that by putting cross subsidy and charging higher amounts to the industry and the commercial users. So what we have effectively done in our tariff mechanisms in the past, and this is true both for gas and power, what we've done is rather than supporting our industry and commercial, which are income producing and generating sectors, we use them to cross subsidize our poor domestic consumers. Now, whether they are poor or not is where we go to the targeting of subsidies I talked about at the start. If we can target the subsidies, that will allow us to remove some of this cross subsidy burden that the industry and commercial sector is bearing. But if we do not target it, the question is, where does that cost come from, given the numbers I've given? So now with that, let's come back to the question of IPPs. If we have the generation cost at 10.5 rupees, and you go to all the producers, and mind you, the IPPs are only 23% of that, as I mentioned, and 47, 48% is government's own plants. If we go to them and say, okay, we want you to reduce your cost by 20%, and let's say they agree, does that solve our problem? No, it doesn't solve our problem. It contributes towards the solution. It does not solve the problem. We have to look and understand the problem. So not that I'm trying to defend IPPs, there are issues that need to be addressed. One of the points raised was by Mia Anjum Nisar, and rightly so, was that the coal cost that these imported coal plants are using is higher than what privately people can bring in. Well, let me tell you, I raised that issue in the cabinet myself about 8 months ago, and we have a cabinet decision to go through coal audit, and that task has been given to our regulator to basically look at why the costs are higher compared to what a private buyer can bring, especially when these plants are bringing large quantities. So those issues are there. But what I'm trying to explain is that we have to understand every piece of the segment, and we have to try to attack the inefficiencies in every piece. I'll conclude this theme with one overall comment, which is very important for people to understand. And it was touched upon earlier. You know, in November last year, well before COVID, the lowest point we touched in the national grid in terms of the demand, electricity demand, was 7,000 megawatts. And in the summer, the highest point we touch is about 24,000 megawatts. So I'm going to pose a very rhetorical but dangerous question. As a nation, can we really afford zero load shedding? Because if that's what our objective is, we plan for 24,000 megawatts in the summer, which peak is going to happen maybe 5 days or 8 days in the whole year. And then we have periods of 6 to 7 months where more than half of that capacity remains unused. Yet we have to pay for it because that is our legal structure and that is our regulatory structure. That is why we need to get rid of that structure, and that is why we need to change our planning paradigm, have base load capacity separate, have peaking capacity separate, have mid-merit capacity separate, and plan according to that. It has never happened in the past. Always, oh, there's load shedding in the summer, so let's just go add 5,000 megawatts. Well, if you add 5,000 megawatts, you got to pay for that 5,000 megawatt. Doesn't matter who owns it. Something has to be paid. But if you're only going to use it for 3 months in the year or 4 months in the year, what do you do for the rest of the year? You still have to pay for it. That is what we are saddled with. And unless we understand those issues and unless we change our planning paradigm, we will not get out of this fix. Now, let me turn to LNG. Somebody raised a question earlier that we are not using our LNG terminals. That is true. We were not fully using them. But again, it's the same situation. In any year, on the average, there's only about 3 to 5 months during which we were not fully using them. Today, for example, we have contracted capacity of 1,200 million cubic feet a day. Right now, we are processing 1,130 as we speak right now. So we are running our terminals close to full, but recognizing that any unutilized capacity is a burden to us. A decision was made by cabinet last year. I took it to the cabinet in July, on July 31st last year, to allow utilization of unutilized capacity. It would have been put into effect in October or November last year, but for some litigation that started, we've gotten past all that. And a week ago, the cabinet approved utilization of unused capacity of these private terminals, whether it is capacity held by the government or whether it is capacity held by the owner because they have something excess. So we expect that at the end of September or beginning of October, first private cargo will come in using the same system. But let me tell everybody, if people think that we have excess capacity in our system for transport or import or regas, think again. We will run out of this capacity next year. We need more terminals, we need more pipelines. There's no two ways about it. What happens is that in the spring and just before the winter, we have brief periods of 8 to 12 weeks where neither the heating load is there nor the cooling load is there. And because of those two periods, what we call shoulder periods, the demand goes down for power and demand goes down for gas. Those brief periods are not representative of what's happening in the rest of the year. We have to deal with that. I'll just conclude LNG with one other comment that one of the speakers or one of the people asking questions touched on, and that related to Henry Hub pricing in the United States and JCC of Japan, or Brent, which is what we use. But let me give you a secret. If the price of Brent or price of oil is above $60, then yes, importing LNG from America and bringing it to South Asia starts making sense. If it is below $60, it's a complete loss. And for those who do not know, the deal that India signed with Cheniere to import LNG from America, they have defaulted on that deal and they're trying to renegotiate it. Because when they signed it, the price of Brent was above 60. Today, the price is down to 42, 43, having dipped as low as 22, 23. We look at all these matrices for the future purchases we make. The contracts that we are saddled with are higher price contracts, which were signed up 5 years ago. But the new purchases that we are making, in addition to whatever we have to honor, these are sovereign contracts, we are buying new LNG at almost 20 to 30% cheaper prices than what we have from our older contracts. Now, let me just turn to KE, and then I'll stop. And if I didn't address somebody's particular question, I'm happy to come back to that after the other speakers have responded. The problem with KE is not that privatization is bad. Let's not throw the baby with the bathwater. The problem is that when KE was privatized, a few fundamental decisions that should have been made before privatizing, those decisions were not made. And because they were not made, we now face a situation where we somehow associate this privatization with what has happened and essentially label privatization to be the wrong policy. That's just not fair. Let me tell you that last year when I was asked to submit a report to the cabinet on what should we do about about discourse, I gave a fairly detailed report to the cabinet, and in that report, I listed about half a dozen questions. And I said, unless you decide on these questions as a policy matter, if you privatize something before deciding these questions, you can have a failed privatization, and all that would happen is just change the ownership and there's no efficiency gain. The purpose of privatization is not to change the ownership. The purpose is to achieve the efficiency gains. And the theory always has been that when it is owned by the private sector and it is somebody's money that is at stake, as opposed to the state's money that is at stake, then people who look after that have a higher interest to protect that money and make it work. If all that is done is change of ownership and the same structural problems remain, there's no incentive. And if the new owner, a new private owner continues to make money in the old system, what incentive do they have to do anything? So what are those questions? I'll just give you 2 or 3. Number 1, should we give monopoly rights? When we privatize a utility, should we give monopoly rights? It's a serious question. Without answering that question, we should not privatize anything. Number 2, when we privatize something, the rates that the regulator will give, are those rates going to be performance-based, or are they still going to be cost-based structures that we've been carrying on our backs for the last 40 years? And if we are going to continue to carry cost plus return structures, what's the point in privatizing? We won't gain anything. Number 3, if you privatize and you don't allow the owner to hire and fire people, how are you going to improve the quality of the HR? And if you're not going to improve the quality of the HR, how do you expect that just by changing the ownership is going to result in overnight magically something dramatic happening? So coming back to what Ismail Qureshi Saab said about KE, and he used the word elite capture, we can call it elite capture. We can give it half a dozen other names. But the bottom line is, if we do not sort out some of these fundamental questions of what do we want the environment to be under which a privatized utility, which by its nature is a monopoly, because you won't have multiple distribution companies building lines into every home, or multiple gas pipelines building lines into every home. You have to answer these questions. And once you answer these questions, then you come up with a solution. Does it make sense to privatize Quetta Electric, or does it make sense to give it to the province? Does it make sense to privatize Lahore Electric, or does it make sense to continue, the government to continue operating? Does it make sense? Answers may be different for different places. It depends on a lot of different things. Why? I'll give you again a very simple example. If you're going to go into Quetta Electric, the total load they have to serve versus the total geographical area they have to span, they will never make money. They will have such long lines with such low loads that they would have to charge double the price. So what do you do in those areas? Well, there you do off-grid solutions. There you do smart grids. You do island systems. You do distributed generation systems. So all of those things have to be looked at. And you cannot look at this one big monolith with one big solution. So as we come back to the issue of why KE has not been transferred to Shanghai yet, yes, there are issues, and these issues are directly related to those decisions that should have been made 10 years ago and have not been made. So what does KE say, for example? KE says, I have monopoly rights until 2023. Don't even talk to me about opening up my area. If you do that, I'm not interested. Shanghai says, I'm not interested. Then KE says, I have a combined bundled rate, transmission, generation, distribution all together. And it's a cost plus structure. Don't even talk to me about anything else. So those are the things we have to deal with. Let me just touch E&P. A question was raised about E&P, and then I'll stop. We have two basic offshore formations. One is what we call Indus Deep, and one is what we call Makran Coast, which is not as deep. We have awarded blocks in the past, and we've done drilling. When you go in Indus Deep, that is where the drilling really starts costing a lot. So for those who didn't follow, this Kekada drilling that was going on offshore last year, and we were all hoping that we'll have a big find. It was a joint effort by 4 companies with ENI and Exxon as the lead. One well cost $110 million. It was a very deep well. But compare that to Makran Coast, where one well at much shallower depths would cost 1/3 of that, 1/4 of that. So we have come up with about a dozen offshore blocks that we expect to be auctioning in the coming weeks. Sabri Saab said, no need to come up with new policies, no need to do something new. We just produce from our existing fields or implement our existing policies. I partly agree with him, but the fact is that when this government came in, I personally went around and talked to at least 40 companies that were operating in this sector, many of whom had left Pakistan, and a very few that were still here from abroad. And 3 or 4 things came out universally, especially those who left. They pointed out a number of issues in our existing policy. And they said, it is for these reasons that we are leaving your country. And so we felt it was necessary that we fix those things, which is what we have done as far as E&P is concerned. As far as the question of existing blocks being there, unfortunately, there I disagree with Sabri Saab. Our existing blocks, the yields we are getting are continuing to decline, and we need to open up new areas to get bigger finds. So I'll just conclude with giving you some numbers. In the last 24 months, we've had 27 new discoveries from existing fields. 27, that's a big number. But what did we get in the total volume? Only 239 MMCF of gas and only 7,000 barrels of oil. So we continue to make discoveries from our existing blocks, but very small finds. And we really need to open up new blocks. You know, of the total land mass that we have, approximately 40% is considered suitable for E&P. And we are really only exploring 3% today. That's what we need to change. So that's what we are doing. So I'll stop there. I'm sure I've missed some specific questions that were addressed to me, but I've already hogged up most of the time of the group. So I'll stop and let others add, but I'm available to answer any more specific questions at the very end.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. That was a very informed discussion, and thank you. You've been very generous with your time. Dr. Salim Ali, sir, please.
Thank you so much. I have learned so much. I'm not going to respond in much detail because Babar Saab has, so admirably provided very data-driven responses. I've learned so much, so I really appreciate that. I think the only question which perhaps I can address quickly is on the climate change issue. In my role on the Global Environment Facility, we manage a very large portfolio of funding for developing countries in both climate mitigation and adaptation. So of course, as Ambassador Saab had said, climate change is a major threat. Pakistan has been named as one of the 5 most vulnerable countries to climate change. I think on the mitigation front, that's where a lot of the climate financing has been focused of late. Pakistan should be submitting more proposals to the GEF. We have a very strong private sector partnership opportunity with GEF. Total GEF funds are about $1 billion a year, billion with a B. But the leveraging of that billion is sometimes as much as 20-fold, depending on what the project is individually. So I think it would be great if there is more interest in that, so that Pakistan can also use those funds for more effective leveraging. On the solar point, there was disagreement. There is always disagreement about what is the role solar can play and the base load issue. Of course, base load has to at present come from other sources until we have very reliable storage capacity of the kind that Tesla is building and all. And maybe that is in the future, which should be considered. But still, baseload is going to be even important under those conditions to some degree, though reliance may be less. I think what is being done with biogas and natural gas should be heartening. In terms of energy density, of course, nuclear is the most energy dense. Unfortunately, for various reasons, the cost equation in nuclear has turned against the sector. That may change with molten salt reactors. I think Pakistan should keep an eye on nuclear in the future with the next generation of molten salt reactors, which could potentially provide also effective baseload, but that's further in the future. With hydrogen, as I said, hydrogen is not going to take on the same level as electric mobility in terms of the EV car versus hydrogen car market. That's how hydrogen was pitched as a foil to electric cars. Hydrogen is going to be a niche area, especially for heavy trucking. That's my view. I think electric cars, e-mobility, which the government is also commendably looking at, especially electric rickshaws and so on, that is likely to be much more prevalent. And where the source, of course, you want the electric energy source to be coming from more sustainable sources, that should be a priority. So I'll just end there, and thanks for the opportunity. I've learned so much.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. In fact, that's one of the things I was thinking as we were going through the discussion, that usually our format is to have a policy, a senior policy maker, an academic, and people who consume the service. And we see how useful that dialogue can be, particularly today where the policy maker is also very well informed. Humayun Saab, please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Saab, and I wish to thank all the speakers for the excellent presentations, and particularly they're all busy people and finding the time to participate in this webinar, and also the questions that we got were pertinent questions, and many people who asked the questions are themselves qualified enough to be speakers, but unfortunately we can't have too many speakers, but we'll get them involved in these discussions at some point. What we try and do at IPR, and we've been here, this is our 7th or 8th year, we try and focus on issues that Pakistan is facing. And they could be anything. They could be economy, energy, water, environment, foreign policy, geostrategic policy, law and order situation, anything that Pakistan faces. And we bring together policymakers, stakeholders, local experts, and from the last many months, we try and bring overseas experts, and our emphasis is to try and find the talent of Pakistan origin that sits outside, because apart from their knowledge in that area, they also are more familiar with the country that they once were living at. And of course, we bring together people who can ask good questions and carry a discussion and a dialogue, because the best way of thrashing something out and converge towards any clear understanding is through a discussion. We very much promote scholarship, as you will see on our website. We are a small organization, but we may be lean, but we are quite mean in our work. So with these comments, I'd like to again thank Nadeem Babar Sahab, the Minister, and Senator Zuberi Sahaba, Mia Anjum Nassar, and Dr. Salim Ali. All the speakers, we've benefited a lot this evening here in Pakistan and morning in America. So thank you very much and hope to see you again soon. And thank you, Ashraf Saab.